Hi guys, my name is Blake. Welcome. It is currently the month of June, and in this month I'm participating in the Shelf Space Olympics Readathon, which I'm having an amazing time with. And I have read so many books. It's insane. I think this is the most books I've ever read in a month. And because of that, I decided to break my wrap up into two parts. One for the first half of the month and one for the second half of the month. So in this one, I will be breaking down what I read from the 1st through the 15th of the month of June. The first book I read was Full Moon by Jim Butcher, and this is the second book in the Dresden Files series, and I gave it 3 stars. I read this book for the Artemis prompt, read a book with moon or night in the title or on the cover. And in this series, we are following Harry Dresden, who is a wizard detective in Chicago. And I definitely didn't like it as much as the first one. I felt like there were a lot of things that I loved about the first one that were missing in this one. I have heard a lot of people say that this is the worst Dresden Files book. And if that's the case, I think I'm going to be very happy with the rest of the series. I still enjoyed this one, but a lot of that detective work that I was loving from the first one was missing here. But in this one, we have werewolves loose in the city, and I feel like we didn't do as much detective work this time around because we already know that they are werewolves from the first crime scene. He has established that they are werewolves. And this book, the tone felt different from the first half than in the second half. It almost felt like it could have been 2 different books, and I feel like it struggled with some pacing issues. My biggest problem with this series so far has been Detective Murphy. That's the police officer that he works with. A lot of people love her, and I just don't get it because she seems really dumb to me. She's constantly jumping to conclusions. She doesn't listen to what others have to say. And she is constantly accusing the wrong person of being the killer. In both the first book and in this book. Like, it's happened twice now. And it's really irritating because this person is obviously not the killer. There are like so many clues that it's not them, and you don't believe it. It's so frustrating. And that was my biggest beef with this book, was that it felt that one aspect at the end there felt too similar to the first one. I still enjoyed this book, though. I think that Harry is a really interesting character. He is a very flawed person, and he is aware of it. And he really struggles. In this book, we got more of his back history and more of his past. And you definitely get the sense that there is a bigger overarching story here than just a serialized detective novel. And I'm not crazy about the way that Harry describes women's bodies. All of the women in this book series are extremely sexualized, and I am not fond of that, but I know that it gets better as the series progresses. What I really love about this series is the magic system. It's very physics-based, and the magic has a very strict set of rules that have to be followed. And with each book, I feel like we're getting more and more in depth in the magic system, and I really enjoy and appreciate that. And so I'm really looking forward to continuing on, even though I didn't love this one as much. The next book that I attempted to read was A Murder in Time by Julie McElwain. I say attempted because I ended up DNFing this one. I was going to read it for the Aphrodite prompt, which was read a book with a beautiful cover. And I read 25%, and I was incredibly disappointed. In this book, we're following this FBI agent as she gets sent back in time, and there is a serial killer on the loose. The first 25% of the book, we are following our FBI character in her day-to-day life, and then the time traveling aspect had just begun, and the main character just doesn't make good decisions when she traveled back in time. And the serial killer hadn't come up at all yet, so I ended up giving this one 2 stars. The The next book I read was Illuminae by Amie Kaufman and Kristoff. This is the first book in the Illuminae files, and I gave this 4 stars. I read this for the Apollo prompt, which was read a book in mixed media format. I was kind of surprised because I don't have a lot of experience reading books in kind of that mixed media format, but I really loved this book. The format is written through like emails and message exchanges, and it's got a lot of these like funky pages, and I really loved that aspect. It felt really immersive and clever. It took me about 200 pages to get into this, but once I was invested, I was hooked. I loved this idea of Earth being attacked, and then we have these two well, I didn't love the idea, but you know, as a story concept, it's cool. And we have these 2 teenagers that get separated, and they're trying to get back to each other and their families and their friends. There is this plague outbreak, and we have an AI ship who it happens to be evil, and it's a really interesting setup, and I really enjoyed this AI ship. I love AI characters, especially an evil one, and the way that he is written is really well done, and I think he was actually the most complex character in the story. I do wish that the characters themselves had more page time. I do wish that they had more development. The next book I have is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. And I read this for the Demeter prompt, which was read a book with food on the cover. And I ended up giving this one 2 stars. And I have really mixed feelings because, as you can probably imagine, judging by the title, this book takes place in the South, in Charleston, South Carolina, and we are following these older women in this book club, and this strange man comes to town and things start happening, and they assume that he is a vampire. And that sounds really cool, and it sounds fun, and it was fun until it wasn't. So there were a lot of things that I really loved about this book, especially in the beginning. I loved the first half. I thought I was going to give it 5 stars, and I really liked the main character, Patricia, and her group of friends. I like that we're following all of these older women, and I like that it takes place in this southern setting, and I think that the southern aspect was spot on. Just the southern hospitality aspects and the way that they treated each other, and the social structure of this group of friends feels very much like being in the South. We're following our main character, Patricia, and she's kind of an unreliable narrator. We don't really know if what she is saying is accurate or if it's just in her imagination. And the first part of this felt very much like a thriller. And it was interesting watching the ladies in this book club speculate, and it was interesting watching Patricia speculate, and I loved the aspect of, is this really happening, or is Patricia just actually being paranoid? But that's kind of where my enjoyment ends. I also really liked the vampire aspects of this book. Grady Hendrix does a really interesting thing with vampires that I don't see done very often. This is a genuinely scary and manipulative vampire. And he seems very charming on the outside, but then you start looking more closely, and he is very influential and very manipulative, and he really is able to get his way. He is able to trick people, and he can mind control animals of the night. I feel like in the second half of this book, things kind of started to fall apart. I feel like the main character did a lot of stupid things that didn't make any sense. Like she would intentionally put herself in situations to kind of test this person that she thinks is a vampire. None of the women in the book club would stand up for themselves or each other, and their husbands treated them like garbage. And it was really frustrating because I wanted these women to stand up for each other, or at least themselves, and then they didn't. I feel like everything wrapped up too easily. I feel like it was too clean, and it kind of has an open ending, and I had a lot of questions about the vampire lore in this world. There were still some things that never get answered, and that really bummed me out because I like to have a nice complete finish in books, and this one didn't have that. The next book that I read was The Reluctant Queen by Sarah Beth Durst. This is the second book in the Queens of Renthia series, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. I read this for the Hera prompt, which is read a book with a queendom, and I really enjoy this series. I think Sarah Beth Durst might be a favorite author of mine. I've only read 2 of her books, but I have a suspicion that she will be. But in this book, we are in this land where the people live a very nature-based lifestyle. They live up in the canopies of trees, and that's how they make their living, and that's how they survive, essentially. And we have this queen that is supposed to keep these evil wood spirits in check that are constantly eating people. But her powers keep slipping, and these wood spirits keep attacking people, and nobody knows why. And that's the setup for the first book. Who they end up finding is this older woman who has 2 children. And she doesn't want to use her abilities. She doesn't want to be a queen. She doesn't want to be a champion for the queen. She wants nothing to do with that lifestyle. And I think it was really amazing to read this book from the perspective of an older female character, because we just don't have that in fantasy very often. And as in the first book, I really enjoyed how dark and brutal this world could be, and I love this author's writing style. It feels like it's written like a fairy tale, and it's really descriptive without being info dumpy, and I think it's just, this whole entire world is just phenomenal. And in this book, we get further world building, and we get some political intrigue going on. And we have this older female character, which we don't see very often. And I really like how there are so many strong female characters in this series and their different relationships with each other. We have mother-daughter, sister-sister, friends, mentor to student. We have lots of different types of relationships in here, and we have a lot of really great female characters. My only dislike was that the main character had 2 small children, and they were both below the age of 8, I think, and I really just don't like child characters in books, and whenever they were on the page, I wasn't really thrilled about having them there. The next book I read was His Majesty's Dragon by Naomi Novik. I read this for the Aries prompt, which was read a military-centered fantasy. I really enjoyed this. I would highly recommend this to anyone that likes animal companions. This book takes place during the Napoleonic Wars, but it's kind of a historical fantasy as we have dragons. We're following this naval captain. He captures a dragon egg, and he desperately doesn't want this dragon egg to hatch to him, because that means that he must join the Royal Air Force and become a dragon rider, which he desperately does not want to happen. But as the story goes, this dragon hatches for our naval captain, and he's forced into this very different world as a dragon rider. And I really enjoyed the relationship between this captain and this dragon, and the way that they interact with each other. And this dragon is very much like a dog or a house cat. And someone on Goodreads said that this Captain Lawrence character reminded them of Norrington from Pirates of the Caribbean, and that is so accurate. That is the most spot-on description, because he's very much like that. Lawrence is like a very stiff character. He is very stuck on his morals, and he doesn't want to do anything untoward or that's not socially accepted. But I really feel like the dragons are where this book really shines. Whenever the dragons aren't on the page, I feel like the book really suffers whenever we're just following the characters themselves. As much as I like Lawrence, this book just doesn't have the same feel as it does when the dragons are on the page. I really struggled with some of the aerial combat scenes in this book, though, because they were at times hard to picture. We have these dragons that are carrying these massive platforms, and they can hold up to hundreds of people on them, and they're in combat with other dragons, and all the dragon riders are hooked into these very complicated harness systems. And the way that it's written, it was kind of hard for me personally to imagine some of these maneuvers and some of the things that they were doing. The next book I read was Don't Call the Wolves by Aleksandra Ross. And I read this for the Aphrodite prompt, which was read a book with a beautiful cover. I gave this one 3.5 stars. This is a Polish fairy tale retelling. And there were so many aspects of this that I really enjoyed. It very much feels like a fairy tale retelling. We have this male character that is a descendant of the wolves, and this is a long line of dragon slayers, and he is the last one left. And we have our female POV character, and she is a lynx shapeshifter, and she is the queen of this enchanted forest. But an evil dragon has kind of taken over this enchanted forest, and along with him, a lot of evil has come up into this forest, and she hires this prince to kind of help her slay this dragon. We have a Striga in here, we have Baba Yaga, we have water nymphs. There are a lot of nods to fairy tales, and I really enjoyed that aspect. The only thing that I didn't like was I didn't really know when this book was set, time-wise. It seems like it's set in a medieval European setting, but then they have modern amenities, especially in the first bit of this book. They're describing like lighters and projectors, and they have cameras, and they have modern electricity. And that aspect pulled me out of the story. Every time something modern would come up, it didn't feel like it was a fairy tale. It didn't feel like it fit in the setting. The writing is really dark and descriptive, and it has a very lyrical quality to it. There is a lot of world building in this book. I'd say probably about half of it is descriptions, and I personally really like lots of world building and descriptions, so that was good for me, but I can see where other people wouldn't like that. The characters really don't get a ton of development. Another thing that I didn't like was the romance aspect. The lynx queen and the descendant of the wolves, they meet, and it's very much an enemies to lovers trope situation, but from the moment they meet, you know that they are going to fall in love, and it has very much of an insta-love feel to it. Romance kind of takes over towards the end there, and I wasn't fond of that aspect. But overall, I did enjoy the story, and I liked a lot of the fairy tale aspects that she included, and I would definitely read something else by this author as well. And the last book I read for the first half of the month was Rise of Empire by Michael J. Sullivan, and this is the third and fourth books in the Rhyuria Revelation series. And I read this for the Hermes prompt, which was read a book with a quest element. And I can't go too in depth as to what this third and fourth book are about, because it is so far into the series. But the premise for the first book in the series is that we're following Royce and Hadrian, who are thieves for hire. And they kind of get caught up in a lot of political drama by accident. And in this series, in these books, we're kind of furthering along with their involvement in these politics, and the world has gotten a lot bigger in these books, and there is a lot more political intrigue. And I think that these two were the best that I have read so far in the series, especially the third one, which was Nifron Rising. That one was my favorite so far. The series very much has a classic fantasy feel. We are going on a lot of quests, and we are traveling, and we have these other fantasy races. But there is a war brewing, and there is a lot of conflict between these different kingdoms. And that is kind of the bigger picture of what's going on, but Royce and Hadrian don't want to be involved, and they keep getting sucked into it. And it's a really interesting setup, and I absolutely love Royce and Hadrian's friendship. And this series is just really fun and quick. Like, the books are only like 300 pages, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I am really looking forward to seeing where the rest of this goes. Those are all the books that I read for the first half of June. Let me know if you've read any of these, and let me know what you've read, because I would love to know. And I'll see you again with another video soon.